7 days had passed since the Galactic Council sent their warning to Earth. And in all that time, not a single response had come back from the small blue world on the edge of explored space. Ambassador Kethrol stood before the communication terminal in her private quarters, trying once again to reach someone on Earth. And once again, she was met with nothing but the empty hiss of static. "This makes no sense," she muttered to herself as she adjusted the frequency and tried a different channel. She had attempted every diplomatic frequency, every emergency channel, and even the civilian communication networks that connected Earth to the rest of the galaxy. But every single attempt had resulted in the same frustrating silence. The door to her quarters slid open and Ambassador Yeel entered, her crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the walls as she moved. "Still nothing?" Yeel asked, though she already knew the answer from the frustrated expression on Kethrol's face. "Nothing at all," Kethrol confirmed with a heavy sigh. "It is as if the entire planet has simply stopped talking to the rest of the universe." Yeel moved closer to the terminal and studied the readings with her strange compound eyes that could see spectrums of light no other species could perceive. "The channels are not blocked or destroyed," she observed. "The infrastructure is still intact, which means they are choosing not to respond." Kethrol shook her head in confusion, unable to understand why any species facing extinction would go silent instead of screaming for help. "Perhaps they have already been destroyed," she said. Though she did not truly believe her own words, Yeel made a sound that might have been laughter in her species, a gentle chiming of crystals that echoed through the room. "You do not know humans the way I do," she said. "I have visited Earth many times, and I have studied their history and their culture extensively." She turned to face Kethrol with an expression that was difficult to read on her alien features. "If the humans were dying, they would be broadcasting on every frequency in existence," Yeel continued. "They would be sending desperate messages and making grand speeches and probably composing dramatic music to accompany their final moments." Kethrol tilted her head in confusion at this description. "They are a theatrical species," Yeel explained. "They love drama and spectacle and making their voices heard across the void. And the fact that they have gone completely silent tells me something very important." "What does it tell you?" Kethrol, Ascidiel's form flickered with colors that Kethrol recognized as unease and concern. "It tells me that they do not want us to see what they are doing." The two ambassadors made their way to the Council's observation center, where long-range sensors monitored activity throughout the galaxy. And what they found there only deepened the mystery surrounding humanity. Minister Voss was already present, studying the data feeds with a troubled expression on his blue face. "The orbital stations around Earth have gone dark," he reported as they entered. "No power signatures, no communication signals. Nothing at all." "Have they been destroyed?" Kethrol asked with alarm in her voice. Voss shook his head slowly. "That is what makes this so strange, because the stations are still there, still intact as far as our sensors can tell. But they have simply shut down all external systems." He pulled up a holographic display showing the Sol system, and Kethrol gasped at what she saw. Ships were moving throughout the system, dozens of them. But they were not fleeing toward the safety of deeper space, as anyone would expect. And instead they were converging toward Earth from every corner of the system. "What are they doing?" she whispered. "We do not know," Voss admitted. "Our sensors cannot penetrate whatever shielding they have activated around the inner system, and we are essentially blind to everything happening near Earth itself." Ambassador Yeel moved closer to the display, her body pulsing with intense concentration as she studied the patterns of movement. "They are organizing," she said quietly. "This is not panic or chaos. This is coordinated action on a scale I have never seen from humanity before." The door opened again, and High Arbiter Sullen entered. his ancient face grave as he surveyed the gathered representatives. "I have received reports that are most disturbing," he announced. "Our deep space observation drones have detected energy readings from beneath the surface of Earth itself." He added the drone data to the holographic display, and everyone in the room fell silent at what they saw. Massive power signatures were emanating from deep underground. Signatures so intense that they dwarfed anything humanity had ever demonstrated before. And they were growing stronger with each passing hour. That level of energy output is impossible for a civilization as young as humanity, Minister Voss said with disbelief clear in his voice. "And yet, there it is." Selene replied, "Either our understanding of human capabilities has been deeply flawed, or they have been hiding something from us since the day they joined the Council." Kethril thought back to every interaction she had ever had with human diplomats, every conversation and negotiation and cultural exchange, and she tried to remember any hint that they were concealing such power, but the humans had always seemed so open and friendly, so eager to learn about the galaxy and share their own culture with others. And she had never once suspected that they might be keeping secrets. "The fleet from the void reaches will arrive in 3 days," Selene continued. "Whatever the humans are planning, we will soon see the results." Ambassador Yiel turned away from the display with a strange expression on her crystalline features. "I visited Earth 5 cycles ago," she said softly, "and I spent time learning about their history, their wars and conflicts and struggles for survival." She paused, her form flickering with colors that Kethril did not recognize. "They have a saying that has stayed with me ever since." Yiel continued, "They say that it is always the quiet ones you have to watch out for." Minister Voss made a dismissive sound. Primitive superstition from a primitive species. But Kethril saw something in Yiel's expression that made her blood run cold. A knowing look that suggested the crystalline ambassador understood something the rest of them did not. "The humans have gone quiet," Yiel said, "and I think that should terrify us all." For 3 more days the Council watched and waited, sending probe after probe toward the Sol system, only to have each one lose contact as it crossed into the shielded zone around Earth. And when the fleet from the void reaches finally arrived at the edge of the system, the entire galaxy held its breath. What happened next would change everything they thought they knew about humanity and about the true nature of the universe itself. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had never been so quiet, and the silence hung heavy like a storm about to break upon them all. Ambassador Kethril stood at the center of the circular room, her forearms trembling as she tried to find the words that had brought her here in such desperate haste. And every eye in the chamber watched her with growing fear. "I have called this emergency gathering because our long-range sensors have detected something terrible," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of what she knew. The council members shifted in their seats, and High Arbiter Solon leaned forward with his ancient face twisted in concern as he waited for her to continue. "A fleet has emerged from the void reaches," Kethril announced, and gasps echoed through the chamber like waves crashing against rocks. The void reaches were a place of nightmares and old stories, a region of space where ships vanished without trace and where no civilization dared to venture. And for something to come from that darkness meant only one thing. "How many ships?" asked Minister Voss of the Krethian Alliance, his blue skin turning pale as he spoke. Kethril closed her eyes for a moment before answering, 4,000 vessels, each one heavily armed with weapons our sensors cannot fully identify." The chamber erupted into chaos as representatives of 100 species began shouting and arguing with each other, their voices mixing into a terrible noise of fear and confusion. High Arbiter Solon raised his hand for silence, and slowly the room grew quiet again as everyone turned to face him with desperate hope in their eyes. "What is their heading?" he asked in a voice that betrayed none of the terror he surely felt inside. Kethril activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber, and a map of the galaxy appeared before them all, showing stars and planets and trade routes that connected their great civilization. A red line appeared on the map, starting from the dark region known as the Void Reaches and cutting straight through space toward a small yellow star on the outer edge of explored territory. They are heading directly for Sol 3, Kethral said, and her words fell upon the chamber like a death sentence. Sol 3 was Earth, the homeworld of humanity. Those strange and fascinating newcomers who had only joined the Galactic Council 40 cycles ago. And every species in the room knew exactly what this meant. The humans, whispered Ambassador Yeel of the Synthesis Collective, her crystalline body flickering with colors that showed her distress. Humanity had been a curiosity since they first made contact with the greater galaxy, a species that had evolved on a harsh and violent world, fighting each other for thousands of years before finally reaching the stars. And they had joined the council with enthusiasm and wonder at discovering they were not alone. But they were young and small compared to the ancient empires that ruled the galaxy, with only a handful of ships and no real military to speak of. And against 4,000 warships from the Void Reaches, they would be utterly defenseless. We must warn them immediately, said Representative Torn of the Velaki Dominion, his massive form rising from his seat in agitation. Warning them will do nothing, countered Minister Voss with a shake of his head. They have no fleet capable of standing against such a force. And even if they did, they would be outnumbered beyond any hope of victory. Then we must send our own ships to defend them, Torn insisted, his voice growing louder with each word. High Arbiter Solon held up his hand once more, and the room fell silent as he spoke the words that none of them wanted to hear, but all of them knew to be true. To mobilize a defensive coalition would take 60 cycles at minimum, he said, his voice heavy with regret. The fleet from the Void Reaches will reach Sol 3 in less than 10 cycles, and there is nothing we can do to stop them. The truth of his words settled over the chamber like a funeral shroud, and many of the representatives lowered their heads in shame at their own helplessness. So we simply let them die? Asked Ambassador Yeel, her form pulsing with angry red light. We have no other choice, Solon replied. And though his face remained calm, his eyes showed the pain of what he was saying. Kethral watched the red line on the holographic map creeping ever closer to that small yellow star. And she thought of the humans she had met during her diplomatic visits to Earth, of their strange customs and their loud laughter, and their incredible capacity for both violence and kindness. They were such a young species, full of hope and dreams and ambitions that stretched beyond their tiny corner of the galaxy. And now they would be destroyed before they ever had a chance to truly shine among the stars. Perhaps, said Minister Voss in a tone that carried more relief than sadness, this is simply the way of the universe. And we should be grateful that the fleet chose a target on the outer edges rather than striking at the heart of our civilization. Several representatives nodded at his words, and Kethral felt disgust rising in her throat at how quickly they were willing to sacrifice humanity to save themselves. We should still send a warning, she insisted. They deserve to know what is coming, even if there is nothing they can do to stop it. High Arbiter Solon nodded slowly and gestured to the communication officers at the edge of the chamber. Open a channel to Earth and inform them of the approaching threat. And may whatever gods they believe in grant them mercy in their final days. The message was sent across the vast distances of space, carrying news of doom to a world that had only recently learned it was not alone in the universe. And as the council watched the red line move ever closer to Sol 3, they felt the comfortable certainty that this tragedy would soon be over, that humanity would become just another lost species in the long history of the galaxy, and that their own worlds would remain safe from the darkness that lurked in the Void Reaches. They could not have been more wrong, for as the humans received the council's warning, they did not panic or despair or beg for help that could never arrive in time. And instead they began to prepare in ways that the galaxy could never have imagined deep beneath the surface of Earth. Massive doors that had been sealed for decades began to open, and machines that had been sleeping since before humanity reached the stars hummed to life with terrible purpose. The humans had been waiting for this moment since the day they first learned they were not alone. And they had never forgotten the most important lesson their violent history had taught them. In a universe full of predators, only the strong survive, and humanity had every intention of surviving. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system. 4,000 ships appearing in perfect formation like a swarm of metal locusts descending upon a helpless field of granite. The heart of the fleet sat the command vessel, a massive structure of black metal and pulsing red light that dwarfed everything around it. And within its dark chambers, the leader of the invasion force surveyed his prey. His name was Sovereign Krath, and he had lived for over 3,000 years, consuming world after world in his endless hunger for conquest and domination. His body was a nightmare of chitinous plates and sharp edges, standing 4 meters tall, with 6 limbs that could tear through metal as easily as flesh. And his eyes glowed with an ancient intelligence that had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves upon a shore. Open a channel to all frequencies, he commanded, his voice a deep rumble that made his subordinates tremble. Let the galaxy know who has come to feed. The transmission went out across all of known space, reaching every ship and station and planet that had ears to hear. And the Galactic Council watched in their great chamber as the face of their oldest nightmare appeared before them. I am Sovereign Krath of the Morrowan, the creature announced, and we have returned from the darkness where your ancestors drove us so long ago. I, Arbiter. Solon felt his heart stop as memories of old records and ancient warnings flooded through his mind. Stories he had thought were myths meant to frighten children into obedience. The Morrowan had been the terror of the galaxy before the Council even existed. A species of pure predators who had swept across the stars, consuming everything in their path. And they had only been stopped when a coalition of species sacrificed half their populations to drive them into the void reaches. We have spent 3,000 years rebuilding our strength, Krath continued, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. And now we have emerged to reclaim what was always ours. He leaned forward toward the camera, his glowing eyes seeming to pierce through the transmission itself. The small world you call Earth will be our first meal, he said. A taste of what is to come. And once we have finished there, we will move on to your precious council worlds. His laughter was a horrible sound, like bones being crushed beneath heavy stones. Do not try to interfere, he warned, or we will simply add your fleets to our harvest. But if you stay away and watch quietly like the prey you are, we may leave your worlds for last. The transmission ended, and the council chamber erupted into chaos as representatives screamed and argued and demanded action that everyone knew was impossible. We have to do something, cried Representative Torn, his massive fists pounding the table before him. There is nothing we can do, Minister Voss replied with despair in his voice. The Morrowan destroyed empires that made ours look like children playing with toys. And if they have truly returned, then we are all doomed. But before anyone could respond, a new transmission cut through the chaos, overriding every channel with a signal that seemed to burn with intensity. The face that appeared was human. A woman with dark hair pulled back tightly and eyes that held no fear whatsoever. Only cold determination that sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. This is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Defense Coalition, she announced, her voice steady and calm despite the death sentence that had just been proclaimed upon her world. Behind her, the council could see dozens of humans in military uniforms moving with urgent purpose, working at stations and coordinating actions with practiced efficiency. We have received your warnings about the approaching fleet, Admiral Chun continued. And we appreciate your concern for our well-being. She smiled then. And something about that smile made Ambassador Kethral's blood run cold. However, the Admiral said, "We will not require any assistance in dealing with this threat." The council chamber fell absolutely silent as every representative stared at the human woman with disbelief. In fact, she continued, her smile growing wider. "We must insist that all council vessels clear a 3-light-year radius around the Sol system immediately." She leaned forward toward the camera, and her eyes seemed to burn with something ancient and terrible. "Things are about to get very messy," she said. "And we would hate for any of our friends to get caught in the crossfire." The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the council in stunned silence. Did she just refuse our help? Minister Voss asked with confusion twisting his features. "She did not refuse our help," Ambassador Yiel said quietly, her crystalline form pulsing with colors that showed deep unease. "She refused our presence because she does not want us to see what is about to happen." High Arbiter Solon turned to the sensor operators at the edge of the chamber. "Can we get any readings from inside the Sol system now?" The operators worked frantically at their stations before one of them looked up with wide eyes. "The shielding around the inner system has been lowered," she reported, "and we are receiving clear sensor data for the first time in days." She transferred the data to the main display, and everyone in the chamber gasped at what they saw. Earth's moon was changing, its surface shifting and cracking as massive sections began to separate from each other. And from within the gaps, brilliant light poured out into the darkness of space. "What is happening to their moon?" Kethral whispered. No one had an answer, because what they were witnessing should have been impossible. The humans had somehow hollowed out their own moon, and what they had built inside was about to change. Everything the galaxy thought they knew about the young species from Sol 3. Sovereign Krath watched the human transmission from his command throne, and for the first time in 3,000 years, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him several moments to identify the emotion, because it had been so long since he had experienced it. It was curiosity. Interesting. He rumbled to his subordinates, "These creatures have spirit, and I will enjoy breaking them all the more for it." He gestured with one massive claw. "Advance the fleet, and show these humans what happens to prey that forgets its place in the food chain." The Marrowan fleet began to move toward Earth. 4,000 ships of death and destruction converging on a single small world. And on that world, Admiral Chun Wei watched them come with a smile that promised nothing but pain. "They have no idea what they are walking into," she said to her command staff. "Should we warn them?" One of her officers asked with dark humor in his voice. The Admiral shook her head slowly. "Where would be the fun in that?" She turned to face her crew with fire burning in her eyes. "All stations report ready," she ordered. "It is time to show the galaxy what humanity is truly capable of." And deep within the hollow moon, engines that had been sleeping for decades roared to life with terrible power. The observation drones positioned outside the 3-light-year exclusion zone captured everything, transmitting their recordings directly to the Galactic Council chamber, where every representative sat in terrified fascination. Sovereign Krath led his fleet toward Earth with absolute confidence. 4,000 Marrowan warships moving in perfect formation like a wall of death, sweeping across the void. Pathetic. He growled as his sensors showed him the handful of human vessels gathering in orbit around their homeworld. "They have perhaps 50 ships to stand against our thousands." His subordinates clicked their mandibles in anticipation of the slaughter to come, already imagining the feast they would enjoy once the battle was over. "All ships prepare to fire on my command," Krath ordered. "We will reduce their world to ash and use their bodies to fuel our journey to the next." He never finished his sentence. The moon split open, not exploded. Not shattered, but opened like a flower blooming in the darkness of space. massive sections separating to reveal what had been hidden within for decades. Light poured out from the hollow core. And from that light emerged ships, hundreds of them, then thousands. Vessels of human design, but scaled up to sizes that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The council chamber fell into stunned silence as the human fleet emerged in wave after wave. Each ship bristling with weapons that registered on sensors as nothing less than devastating. How is this possible? Ambassador Kethrol whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her own hearts. Ambassador Yiel's crystalline form had gone completely white, a sign of absolute shock in her species. They have been preparing, she said, since the moment they learned they were not alone in the universe. They have been building this fleet in secret. The numbers appeared on the council's displays, and many representatives had to look twice to believe what they were seeing. 3,200 human warships now faced the Marrowan fleet, and more were still emerging from the hollow moon like an endless tide of vengeance. Sovereign Krath stared at his sensor displays with something he had not felt in millennia. Genuine surprise. Impossible, he snarled. These primitives could not have built such a force. Not in the brief time since they discovered space travel. But the evidence was right before his eyes, and he was forced to accept that he had drastically underestimated his prey. No matter, he declared, recovering his composure with the arrogance of 3,000 years of conquest. Numbers alone do not win battles, and our weapons have cracked the cores of planets. He raised one massive claw. All ships, fire at will. The Marrowan fleet unleashed its terrible arsenal. Weapons that had burned civilizations and boiled oceans, crossing the distance toward the human ships, and the humans responded. Admiral Chun Wei stood at the center of her command deck, watching the enemy fire approaching with calm analysis. All ships, activate adaptive shielding pattern Alpha 7. She ordered. The human ships shifted their defensive screens in perfect coordination, angles and frequencies adjusting in real time to counter the specific wavelengths of Marrowan weapons. And the devastating barrage that should have destroyed dozens of ships instead splashed harmlessly against shields that had been designed specifically to stop it. Return fire, the Admiral commanded. Show them what human ingenuity looks like. The human fleet opened up with weapons that made the Council observers gasp in disbelief. Railguns that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Angie weapons that cut through Marrowan armor like it was made of paper. And missiles that seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver the enemy attempted. Marrowan ships began to die. Krath watched his forces take casualties for the first time in 3,000 years. And rage unlike anything he had ever known burned through his ancient body. They are adapting to our weapons, one of his subordinates reported with fear in his voice. Every time we adjust our attack patterns, they somehow anticipate our changes and counter them before we can. The subordinate's station exploded as a human projectile punched through the command ship's hull. All ships, concentrate fire on their largest vessel, Krath commanded. Cut off the head and the body will die. The Marrowan fleet focused its attention on the human flagship, pouring enough firepower to destroy a small moon directly at Admiral Chen Wei's command ship, but the humans had anticipated this as well. Other human vessels moved to intercept, overlapping their shields to create a defensive barrier that absorbed the Marrowan barrage while the flagship continued its relentless assault. They fight like nothing I have ever seen, Krath realized with growing horror. Every tactic we use, they counter. Every advantage we seek, they deny us. The battle raged for 6 hours. 6 hours of constant combat that should have been decided in the first 30 minutes. And throughout it all, the humans adapted and evolved and improved. When Marrowan weapons proved effective against their shields, human ships reconfigured their defenses mid-battle, analyzing the attack frequencies and generating countermeasures in real time. When the Marrowan attempted to flank the human formation, human ships had already repositioned to meet them, as if they could predict the enemy's movements before they were made. When Krath ordered his most devastating weapons deployed, weapons that had cracked planetary crusts and ignited atmospheres, the humans revealed weapons of their own that made even those terrible devices seem like toys. The Galactic Council watched in stunned horror and growing awe as the tide of battle turned decisively against the Marrowan. They are not just fighting them, High Arbiter Sullen said with wonder in his ancient voice. They are hunting them, and he was right. The human fleet had shifted from defense to offense, cutting through the Marrowan formation with surgical precision, destroying ships with a ruthless efficiency that spoke of millennia of practice in the art of war. By the 5th hour, half the Marrowan fleet was destroyed. By the 6th hour, the survivors were fleeing. Sovereign Krath stood on his damaged bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his subordinates, watching as his once proud fleet scattered before the human onslaught. "This is impossible," he hissed. "We are the Marrowan. We are the eaters of worlds. We do not flee from prey." But his ships were fleeing, the survivors burning their engines at maximum power as they raced toward the edge of the system and the safety of faster-than-light travel of the 4,000 ships that had entered the Sol system. Only 280 escaped. Admiral Chen Wei watched them go with cold satisfaction burning in her eyes. "Should we let them run?" One of her officers asked. The Admiral shook her head slowly. "No, we should not." She turned to face her command staff with determination carved into every line of her face. "They came here to eat our world," she said. "They came here to harvest our people like animals and move on to do the same to the rest of the galaxy." Her hands tightened into fists at her sides, and somewhere in the darkness of the void reaches, they have more ships, more soldiers, more monsters waiting to be unleashed on innocent worlds. She looked at the sensor display showing the fleeing Marrowan vessels. "Set a pursuit course," she ordered. "We are going to follow them home." The Council watched in amazement as the human fleet did exactly that, chasing the survivors of the Marrowan Armada into the darkness of the void reaches, going where no other species had dared to venture in 3,000 years. And as the human ships disappeared from their sensors, Ambassador Yield turned to face her fellow representatives with something close to fear in her voice. "We thought we were protecting them," she said softly. "We thought they were the weak ones who needed our help." She shook her head, her crystalline form pulsing with colors that had no name in any known language. "We were wrong about everything." 3 months passed in silence. 3 months during which the Galactic Council heard nothing from the human fleet that had vanished into the void reaches. And during that time, the representatives argued endlessly about what it all meant. Some believed the humans had been destroyed, that their pursuit of the Marrowan had been foolish arrogance that led them to their doom in that cursed region of space. Others believed they were still fighting, locked in a desperate battle somewhere in the darkness where no sensors could reach. But Ambassador Yield suspected the truth was something far more significant, something that would change the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy forever. She was right. The human fleet emerged from the void reaches on a quiet morning, 3,000 ships returning from the darkness like ghosts rising from the grave. And at their head flew the flagship of Admiral Chen Wei. But they were not alone. Behind the human warships came other vessels, strange ships of designs that no one in the Council had ever seen before. Ships that carried refugees from a nightmare that had lasted for thousands of years. Admiral Chen Wei requested permission to address the Galactic Council in person. And for the first time since the Battle of Sol, the representatives gathered to hear directly from a human. She walked into the great chamber alone, her uniform worn and stained from months of combat, her face showing lines of exhaustion that had not been there before, and her eyes carrying a weight that made even the oldest representatives fall silent. "We found the Marrowan homeworld," she announced without greeting or ceremony. a massive fortress planet at the heart of the void reaches, surrounded by defenses that had been building for 3,000 years. She paused, and something flickered across her face that might have been pain or might have been grief. We also found what they had been doing during all those centuries of silence. She activated a holographic display, and the council chamber gasped in horror at what appeared before them. Images of massive facilities filled the chamber. Structures the size of cities that had been built for a single terrible purpose. And within those facilities were beings of species that the council had never seen. Harvesting pens, Admiral Chun explained, her voice flat and cold. The Marrowan did not simply destroy the civilizations they conquered, they kept them, breeding them like livestock for generation after generation. She cycled through image after image, showing the faces of beings who had been born into captivity and had never known freedom, who had lived their entire lives as food for monsters. We found 13 species, she continued. 13 entire civilizations that were consumed by the Marrowan before your council even existed. And their descendants have been slaves ever since. The chamber was absolutely silent, every representative staring at the images with varying degrees of horror and shame. We destroyed the fortress, Admiral Chun said. We broke open the harvesting pens and freed everyone we could find. And we hunted down every Marrowan ship that tried to escape. She looked around the chamber with eyes that seemed to see through every representative present. The Marrowan are gone, she announced. Their fleet is destroyed. Their homeworld is in ruins. And their species will never threaten this galaxy again. High Arbiter Solon rose slowly from his seat, his ancient face showing emotions that his long life had not prepared him to feel. Admiral Chun, he said carefully. When we first detected the Marrowan fleet heading toward your world, we believed you were defenseless. We believed you would be destroyed without hope of survival. He spread his hands in a gesture of confusion. How did you know to prepare for this? How did you build such a fleet without any of us knowing? Admiral Chun was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of a truth that humanity had kept hidden for 40 years. When we first made contact with the galaxy, she said, we were amazed and excited to discover we were not alone. We celebrated and cheered and dreamed of all the wonderful things that awaited us among the stars. She paused, and her expression hardened. But we also studied your history, she continued. We learned about the wars and invasions and extinctions that had shaped your civilizations. We learned about the Marrowan and the devastation they caused. And we realized something very important. She met the eyes of every representative in the chamber. The universe is not kind, she said. It does not protect the weak or reward the innocent. And the only species that survive are the ones who are prepared to fight for their existence. She gestured at the images of the freed slaves that still filled the display. We spent 40 years preparing for exactly this scenario, she admitted. While we smiled and traded and learned about your cultures, we were building a fleet capable of defending our world against anything the universe could throw at us. Minister Voss rose from his seat with anger on his blue face. You deceived us. You pretended to be weak while secretly building an armada. Admiral Chun turned to face him directly, and something in her eyes made the minister shrink back despite himself. We did what we had to do to survive, she replied. And because we were prepared, your worlds are still standing, and 13 species are free for the first time in 3,000 years. The chamber fell silent as the truth of her words sank into every mind present. High Arbiter Solon spoke again, his voice thoughtful rather than accusing. What happens now, Admiral? What does humanity intend to do with this power you have revealed? Admiral Chun's expression softened slightly, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she looked more tired than threatening. We never wanted to be warriors, she said quietly. We hoped the galaxy would be peaceful. We hoped we could put our violent past behind us and grow beyond the need for fleets and weapons. She shook her head slowly. But that hope was naive, and now we know there are worse things than us hiding in the dark places of the universe. She straightened her shoulders and spoke with the authority of a woman who had just defeated an ancient evil. So here is what we intend to do, she announced. We are going to share our technology with every willing species in this council. We are going to help you build defenses and weapons and fleets of your own. She paused and looked around the chamber once more. And if anything else comes crawling out of the darkness, she said, we will be ready, and we will not be alone. Ambassador Yeel rose from her seat and moved toward the human admiral, her crystalline form glowing with colors that represented hope and respect, and something close to awe. You called yourself the youngest species in this council, Yeel said. You let us believe you were the children of the galaxy who needed our protection and guidance. Admiral Chun smiled slightly, and it was a smile that held both sadness and understanding. Every species has its secrets, she replied. We simply kept ours better than most. High Arbiter Sullen gestured for quiet as whispers filled the chamber. When we first received word of the Marrowan fleet, he said slowly, one of our representatives asked a question that I believe deserves an answer. He looked directly at Admiral Chun. We asked if they were attacking Earth. If your world was in danger from this ancient threat. The Admiral met his gaze without flinching. And now I understand that we had it backwards, Sullen continued. Earth was never truly in danger, was it? The Marrowan were the ones walking into a trap. Admiral Chun was silent for a long moment. And when she spoke, her words echoed through the chamber with the weight of prophecy. We learned a long time ago that the best way to defeat a predator is to let it think you are prey, she said. And we have been waiting for something like the Marrowan since the day we first looked up at the stars. As she turned to leave the chamber, Ambassador Kethril called out one final question. Admiral, how long would you have waited? How long would you have kept your true strength hidden if the Marrowan had never come? Chun Wei paused at the door and looked back with eyes that held the weight of 1,000,000 years of human evolution, of survival and struggle and the endless drive to endure against all odds. As long as necessary, she answered. Because that is what humanity does. We survive, we adapt, and we wait. She stepped through the door and was gone, leaving behind a council that would never look at humanity the same way again. And somewhere in the galaxy, in a refugee ship filled with beings who had never known anything but slavery, a child looked out at the stars for the first time and asked what those lights were. Those are other worlds, her mother answered, her voice trembling with emotions she could barely name. And we are free to visit any of them. Who freed us? The child asked. Her mother smiled and pointed toward a ship bearing the flag of Earth. The humans, she said. The ones who were supposed to be prey. The child watched the human ship for a long moment, then looked up at her mother with wonder in her eyes. They must be very brave. Her mother nodded slowly, thinking of the creatures who had hunted her ancestors for thousands of years and the strange, fierce beings who had come from nowhere to destroy them. Yes, she agreed. But I think they are also very, very patient. And across the galaxy, as news of humanity's victory spread from world to world, a new understanding began to take root in the minds of every species. The universe was no longer safe for predators. Humans were watching, and they were always prepared.